In our modern world of advancement, economic, political, and cultural disparities have augmented drastically due to a variety of factors such as technology and globalization. In this video, I'm going to focus on explaining wealth disparities, specifically income inequality. Income inequality is the unequal distribution of household and individual incomes for different participants of the economy. You must remember that income inequality is not a perfect measure for wealth, as it does not consider any other valuable assets such as investment and properties. People with high incomes may also consume all their earnings quickly and might rely on borrowed money. Income inequality per country is measured using the Gini coefficient, which is an index ranging from 0 to 1, where 0 represents perfect income equality and 1 complete income inequality. The Lorenz curve is a graph where the percentage of cumulative income of the total national income is plotted against the cumulative percentage of the corresponding population. The Gini coefficient is calculated using the formula G is equal to A divided by A plus B, where A represents the area between the diagonal and the Lorenz curve, and A plus B refers to the whole area under the diagonal of equality. Globalization and technology are the driving forces behind the growing amount of disparities around the globe, especially the growing income inequality. Firstly, there's the influence of multinational corporations. Their increase in influence may hurt local companies due to the competition they create. They may become monopolies, allowing them to reduce choice and increase prices. Consequently, countries become increasingly dependent on multinational corporations, which may threaten their national sovereignty, potentially prohibiting the government from pursuing policies which would promote equality at the cost of the corporations. If the income inequality partially created by globalization persists, the political decisions of a country will lie in the hands of a few instead of the many. It would be difficult for one to underestimate the impact technology has also had on income inequality. There is the supply and demand theory, which explains that over time, countries like the US has experienced critical changes in the relative returns to low skill and high skill labor. This is due to technological advances raising the demand for skilled labor while replacing unskilled labor with automation. Since the 1980s, the demand for skilled labor has outpaced the supply, which has resulted in the few skilled workers being rewarded with high wages at the cost of the low skilled workers. People will then lose jobs and struggle with low wages, leading to them investing less in their own human capital, and thus the income inequality lingers. Finally, remember that although there is a strong correlation between globalization, technology, and income inequality, it is far from a causal relationship. Countries like Sweden, Germany, and Japan are all affected by globalization, yet they're experiencing little changes in income inequality. Other causes for the income inequality are mostly country specific, and I will address some of those later. When looking at this map, one can see that Southern Africa has the highest Gini values, followed by South and North America. Then comes Asia, North Africa, and Polynesia, with quite high Gini values. Lastly, most European countries have very low Gini indexes, alongside Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, for example. There are other noteworthy anomalies, such as China, with its very high Gini coefficient, and Bosnia, who also has a very abnormal value compared to its neighboring countries. Lastly, the countries in gray have no data for two reasons. Either they are undemocratic, like the DRC, or they're experiencing political instability, like Syria. After looking at the map, it becomes apparent that there is a major difference between the Gini values of developed countries and developing countries. This is because developed countries tend to be more democratic and capitalistic, which stimulates economic growth and equality in the form of education and healthcare, for example. Greater levels of education leads to people being able to pursue careers in the service and research sectors, which are more profitable professions than manufacturing or agricultural labor. Since most people have access to those sectors, there's more income equality, and hence these countries have low Gini values. The OECD is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is an intergovernmental economic organization with 35 members. It was established in 1960 to stimulate economic growth and world trade. And on this map, you see all the member nations. Meanwhile, developing countries are often less democratic and have an agricultural economy, lowering the educational levels, and the political power of the country lies in the hand of the few rather than the many. Consequently, the levels of corruption increase, resulting in more income inequality as the majority is stuck in the agricultural or manufacturing sectors that are not profitable. Sweden has one of the lowest Gini values in the world because of its high taxes and government redistribution, but income inequality has increased in the last few years. Without government involvement, their Gini coefficient is 0.37, which is just slightly lower than the OECD average. Wage differences are, however, lower than in many developed countries due to a centralized bargaining between labor unions and employers to establish different minimum wages. Yet the main source of income equality in Sweden comes from government redistribution. In Sweden's traditional welfare model, people paid high taxes and got a lot of social services and big transfers in return. The new model is more capitalistic with new tax cuts while retaining most social services. This new formula is the reason for Sweden's current increase in its Gini coefficient. The increase is relatively mild compared to other developed countries for a variety of reasons. Firstly, the Swedish state spends more on early childhood education, job searching, and training, enabling people from poorer backgrounds to earn decent salaries. The government has also successfully experimented with making public services more efficient. More schools are run independently, and healthcare private management is growing. When you include the progressivity of Sweden's public services, the OECD estimates that Sweden's Gini value become 0.18, making it the most equal country in the world in terms of income. In conclusion, Sweden's new revamped welfare formula proves that combining capitalism and welfare can lead to economic growth for everyone while also avoiding drastic increases in wage disparities. Now, let's look at the US. The US has an income inequality almost greater than any other developed economy in the world, with a reported Gini index of 0.46 in 2013, according to the US Census Bureau. This hampers the likelihood of people fulfilling the American dream, the idea that hard work leads to success. So, why is this the case? There is still not a definitive answer due to its complexity, as different economists point to different causes. Therefore, I will solely talk about two major causes that are almost undisputed. The first one is low taxes and little government redistribution. The US has a pretty equal Gini coefficient compared to other developed countries before taxes. But after taxes, it's very high, thanks to low government redistribution in the tax and transfer system. Then there's the market income. The market income is a person's total income before taxes and excluding any income from government resources. In the US, people retire later relative to other developed countries, and thus those countries seem to have a greater income inequality before taxes, as they have zero or low market incomes. Meanwhile, in the US, many older households have positive market incomes, where similar households in other countries have no or little market income. For developing countries to achieve income equality, they must strive for two things: democracy and education. Implementing and running free and open elections are key to ensuring that the government represent the will of the many, not just a corrupt elite. This will combat corruption and thus decrease the drastic accumulation of wealth of the few. Yet fiscal stability will also provide the government with an opportunity to fund policies and programs in healthcare and education, for example, that benefits all citizens. The results will be economic growth as the economy industrializes, since people will begin working in the service and research sectors thanks to the great levels of education. Those jobs will stimulate income equality because more skilled based labor yields greater wages and more of those professions will be available. However, remember, becoming a democracy is anything but easy, as otherwise more countries would have already succeeded. It is an arduous process that takes decades and foreign help, and even then, it might not happen. Moreover, to fight income inequality, developed countries must focus on raising taxes for the wealthy to fund government efforts that aid the low and middle class. Those efforts include universal health care, public education, and social security. Another strategy would be to raise the minimum wage and strengthening labor unions in order to increase workers' wages and bargaining powers. Nevertheless, there are reasons why countries would not want to pursue these strategies. Firstly, many people oppose raising taxes because they feel as if they lose more than they gain. Companies and some people would also oppose increasing the minimum wage or creating one because it would cost them more, which could hurt small businesses in particular. The Swedish and Nordic model of combining social democracy and capitalism has yielded the lowest increases in the Gini coefficient while stimulating the economy and creating some of the most fiscally stable nations of the world. Yet, this model might not work for all countries, especially the US, because of two things: the size of the economy and the cultural differences. Sweden happens to have a much lower GDP of $507 billion compared to the US $19.4 trillion. Plus, Swedes are more culturally homogeneous than Americans, despite the current surge in immigration. Yet, one cannot underestimate the impact this model has had on stagnating the Gini coefficients of the Nordic countries. In conclusion, Developing countries should focus on becoming democratic and providing everybody with equal educational opportunities to combat income inequality. But this is a long and tiresome process that takes decades. Developed countries like the US must raise taxes, especially for the affluent, and increase government redistribution if they want to decrease income inequality, despite the opposition it will face from people who think they benefit less from high taxes. Lastly, for developed welfare state, the Nordic model is the way to go. It will ultimately stimulate the economy and decrease the rate in which income inequality increases, till it eventually plateaus and starts to decrease. But remember, there is no perfect solution to solving income inequality. That's it for this video, and thanks for watching.